time for today's session. Today we are
My
going to
pleasure.
talk about Today we are going to talk about customer success as a cross-functional initiative. And before we actually barge you with a set of questions about this and that, a small round of introduction. So Amol has been working in the industry for more than 20 years. He has led successful customer success teams in different organizations, has his own consulting firm, of course. You have recently written a very insightful ebook that describes customer success as a multiverse, which coincides very well with today's topic. Some of this is a little bit that I can explain whoever's listening today about you, but it would be better if you just give us insight into what you have done in all these years.
Sure. Thanks. I think that's a fair introduction, and without taking much time, I like most of the listeners. I think of this podcast, I have landed in customer success from somewhere else. Right. I started my career in 2002 as an HR professional, and then through various transitions, last a few years, I've sort of landed into customer success, and I was fortunate to get senior level positions in HR
Mm.
tech SaaS companies to look at customer success from the inside. And so whatever I know today is a mix of what I've read and what I have been able to do or experiment with from a customer success perspective. So happy to share whatever I have learned so far, the mistakes that I've made. So all of that, I'm looking forward to sharing that with the listeners today.
Yeah, so do we. So do we. This is going to be very exciting. So, in your ebook, the first statement that is mentioned is customer success is not a department, but it's a culture. And
Yes.
taking cue from this particular line, I would say the first question would be that because it should eventually become an org-wide culture instead of just a few members of the whole organization looking after customer success. What teams do you primarily see collaborating to making sure that that function delivers completely, because there's so many parts of customer success in different team base with different aspects of customer journey. So what kind of teams do you see coming together?
So I think if we talk about customer success from a B2B SaaS product organization perspective, then of course
Mhm.
the first and foremost team that I see would have a big impact on what you will do and how you will achieve objectives of customer success is of course the product team, because that's the
Mm.
first, and that's entirely the organization in a way, because
Mhm.
customers are buying your product. The second team that I would say would come very close to impacting how customer success is delivered would be the sales and marketing team, because those teams are actually
Yeah.
putting out there what the product promise is, what the product will do for the customers, what kind of problems customers can solve using that product. All of that communication is going out from these two teams, and then the delivery of those promises is what falls on to typically the customer success teams, which comprises of onboarding and post onboarding support. So I would say in a product organization, these two would form a primary objectives. But yeah, I think like I had mentioned that it's more of a culture, and that's because again, based is my
Mm.
experience of working with customer success professionals in two different companies. I think like I made a transition from
Mm.
somewhere else, right? And I have made a
Mm.
transition from HR as a function, and I believe that statement is true. I can
Mm.
replace customer success with HR, and that statement is still true. Because HR cannot be
Yeah.
fixed into one corner of an organization, so that that's the group of people which will take care of our people. Right? It
Mhm.
has to be all encompassing. Every individual in that organization has to be aligned to that objective. Same way, customer success cannot be parked in one particular function, saying that that's the team which takes care of our customers. Right? It's actually every person
Yeah.
in the organization, especially the people who interface directly with the customer or indirectly with the customer. So, for example, the product teams
Mm.
may be working behind a wall creating the product. They may not be
Mm-hmm.
interacting with the customers on a regular basis, but they need to have an understanding of how the customer is using the product and so on and so forth. And I think increasingly now, even product teams are going out there and meeting customers. So that's
Yes.
why I feel it's a fairly cross-functional responsibility as an organization.
Mm-hmm.
The entire organization needs to be very clear as to what we are doing to ensure that our customers will be successful using our products. So
Correct. I think I share the same thoughts that you have said, because when we face our customers, when we go out and explain them how the product can help them more, they definitely have more feedback on it. And if that feedback is properly communicated internally and taken very well, then the resultant product will be a lot more useful for our customers. I totally agree with that. Now, continuing where we left off in the first question. So, if the CS team alone takes care of, let's say, the customer success initiative versus all of these teams, sales, marketing, product, or even CS support coming into picture, and of course, like you said, not directly facing the customer every time, but if they start collaborating in a more comprehensive way, how do you see that shift versus only when the CS team is doing all the heavy lifting?
okay, uh, I think I'll try and answer that in two parts. See, in organizations where I've worked or what I've seen, even with other organizations, is typically when you look at customer success as customer support or service. First, while in most brick and mortar businesses there is a customer support or a service, the typical notion is that these guys will clean up all the mess which is flowing from upstream, right? Sales guys missold the product, sales guys sold it to the person without establishing their needs at during the installation and commissioning in the brick and mortar world, or in this B2B SaaS world. During the implementation, certain things were looked over and were not done properly. All of that will flow to this team, and they will somehow figure out a way to address that. In B2B SaaS, that is also possible. That will happen, and that has been happening, I think, in many scenarios. In that situation, then what customer success means and does is going to be a lot different than what we actually mean by customer success. Because if we really want to ensure that our customers are successful using our products, we have to be very, very true to that objective right when we are even selling the product, and then saying that, hey, you know what, I don't think you are ready to buy our product at this stage, because if you are so and so, or you're trying to solve this kind of problem, maybe our product is not ready to help you achieve that right now. Uh, but in the current scenario, I think that seems to be taking a backseat, and hence customer success teams are then in fighting on two fronts. Right, one, I'm discussing with the customer, because for the customer it's the same organization. It's just that now a different team is looking after me. So I have to ensure that I still hold the customer and somehow convince them on what was said, why it was said at that particular point of time, and also bring all of that information internally and be able to fight. That second ability of me, how effectively I'm able to fight, is also dependent on how I'm perceived as a function within the organization.
Yeah.
If I'm still being perceived as a person who's a support function and who just has to do that, then I may not even have a bit of an agency within the organization, and that makes my life even more difficult. And that as a reality will change only when all of these aspects change. And in my experiences with organizations, and that's where the actually the ebook around multiverse of CS came into picture, because I realized that unless CS starts to look at all of these things and figure out their own path to take that data back to those respective stakeholders and build a case, as to
Mm-hmm.
why I'm asking for something, I think the picture is not going to change. It's like again, and like I said, I come from HR. So unless HR gives some meaningful insights to the business, it's very difficult for HR to say that business will one fine day wake up and say that, hey, I want strategic inputs from you.
Mm-hmm.
And even if the business says that, am I ready to give that? So it's very similar in CS. I see a lot of parallel between these two functions that I've been part of. So hence what I've tried to do, and which is documented in some shape and format in that ebook, is to try and look at those aspects from a metrics perspective, from a data perspective, and then tell the
Mm-hmm.
story through the data internally, and hopefully then you will be listened to and you'll be given your due.
Yeah. I think the last line that you said, Amol, which is telling the story through data, we will circle back on that point because as we progress, data is taking center stage, and there is no team going forward that will be able to pick, deliver better without having backings of the data. So we'll circle back on that. But before we get there, because we are still talking about different teams, and now we're talking about more collaboration when it comes to delivery, and you have headed delivery team in the past. What challenges do you see when we move towards more collaboration from different teams?
Yeah, see, more people in the kitchen, of course, create some chaos if there is no order.
Hmm.
So what, at least again, like this is my experience of working with cross-functional teams, and I've been a big believer and supporter of not just driving your own functional agenda, but bringing that across the organization and try to get that kind of a support from different functions. So the
Mm-hmm.
first thing that, of course, in my opinion or experience helps is you first understand what that function is trying to do.
Hmm.
Because if, let's say, if the sales force team is under tremendous pressure for growth, and the only thing that they have been told is that was bring in more customers, whatever shape and format, then that's the first thing that then you need to sit down with them and address,
Mm-hmm.
right? As to how, because if I'm running the kitchen, if you're just going out there and hunting any and every animal, and throwing it back into my kitchen saying, "And now cook this." For me to be able to do that effectively and efficiently, I
Hmm.
need to have that kind of a mechanism within the kitchen. And I
Right.
use the kitchen analogy a lot in these environments. So, and I, at least in my experience, I've seen that when you sit down with the sales guys and reason with them in terms of, was, can we agree to have only these kind of uh, animals will be coming in,
Hmm.
there will be at least an 80-90% congruence. Whatever dissonance is there, we can then also agree on how we will address that dissonance. Because accepting that the dissonance will be there because the organization is in a particular stage of growth at that point of time, or the organization is chosen to pursue a particular way of growth, right?
Mm-hmm.
But I believe that will be an 80-20 rule will prevail. 80% of the time you'll be able to find a common ground if you sit down and understand why they're trying to do what they're trying to do. Uh, and with that, I think then with the same conversation you do with the marketing teams, a lot of times marketing teams have a lot of demand from the customer success teams in terms of customer referrals, case studies, video testimonials, and so on and so forth. And building that as part of your operational processes is a key challenge, because typically, like I said, it as a customer success team, or typically when you are focused on the services aspect, you are operating like a QSR, where you're saying, "Oh, fine, this implementation done, it's out of the window. That implementation done, it's out of the window." What needs to happen post implementation in terms of, okay, so if the customer is happy, go back, take their feedback, get a video testimonial done, get some of those processes done. Plugging that in typically is then falls in no man's land, or is, if your expectation is that marketing team should pick that up, clarifying, discussing those and clarifying it with them, defining how that will be handed off, goes a long way in ensuring that those operational aspects get taken care of. In my experience, a lot of times these are falling in no man's land, because The CS teams believe that their job is done once the customer has gone live. Marketing team expects the CS team to still inform them and so on and so forth. So I think in all functional aspects, what I have started with is to sit with you and ask you, what are you doing and why you're doing it, and what's your expectation of CS, and then work from there to say that, okay, what kind of operational processes are you doing? Of course, that would also mean that I would have to drive some changes in terms of process, technology, and people behaviors within the CS function. And I should then be prepared to do that. A lot of times I've seen that part also becomes a very critical part for me to be able to drive from typically a mid or a senior level professional in CS, where I have managed a team. Driving this change in behavior from what we were doing yesterday to what we have to now do today becomes the most critical aspect.
But the statement that you said, which is driving change in behavior, which means changes in processes and technology. Well, I think I would ask my next question in the same regard, which is these different teams, for example, sales team sits with their own information about customer. Product team knows everything in and out about the product itself. The CS support team sits with all of their ticket data, what has been resolved, what's pending, so on and so forth. And because we are looking, at least in this discussion, we're talking highly about collaboration. So how do you think technology here and what aspects of growing technology, AI, ML can be leveraged here to foster better collaboration between teams? How do you think now that there are different ways of coming together? For example, now Zoom and Teams have become probably the primary modes of communication. So how should teams leverage more of technology to make sure that the CS delivers on multiple fronts rather than just one?
I think, I'm a big supporter of digitizing and automating things wherever they can be. And more often than not, I have actually faced a lot of resistance from the teams whose work is getting digitized and automated than anybody else in the organization, right? But I think I would say this one is we look at technology tools as elixir, right? But we have to understand that they're called tools for a particular reason. They're still a tool. It's like any other physical tool that you pick up. It will be as good as you are in your ability to use that. Secondly, just by if I give you a bunch of tools, right, I can give you the entire toolbox of a carpenter and say that, hey, now you are a carpenter, now go build a house. You would not be able to do it. Right? You should have to understand the process of building the house, which can still be done with or without maybe the entire toolbox. So hence, I always, firstly, I want to focus on the process aspects of it. So that's why I said that, if you know what the process is and why the process has to be in that particular way, then the conversation can go into which kind of tools will enable that process for me to make that process more efficient, effective, and scalable, and whatever, right, aligned to other objectives. So, but yes, I mean, in terms of kind of tools that one has to look at, of course, for instance, SmartKarrot is a CS ops platform. I think anything and everything within the CS operations can be digitized. I'm not too sure how much of that can be automated as of now, but at least can be digitized. So all your touch points can then be tracked. When do you speak with that customer last? It becomes a very important aspect to know. Customer health scores are, I think, very, very important for us to know. So anything and everything that you want to build within your customer success operational aspects of it should be digitized for sure. What tool you will use will be a function of what processes you have and how skilled is your team to adopt such digitization. And like I said, in many situations, I have seen the team which is getting digitized will resist that change the most for a variety of reasons. So you also have to be aware of that, and you also have to factor that in. some of my digitization efforts and process change efforts have failed miserably because I was blindsided, in some of those aspects, even now. Right.
Oh.
So, and then of course, when you are in this kind of a cross-functional conversation with the product team, with the engineering team, or with the sales and marketing teams, then immediately, like I said, when I know what they are doing and why they are doing it, and what are their expectations out of me as a function, the needs for data and what kind of an information needs to be shared, what kind of a governance structure needs to be there starts to emerge.
Mm-hmm.
And my style or my preference has always been to start something rather than wait for it to be perfect on paper. You start with something maybe once a week, once in a fortnight, and you start discussing these points data, and then the structure and the more formal methodologies and matrices can evolve out of that conversation. But yeah, I mean, those conversations then will lead to that. Okay, what kind of tool? Because we in earlier companies where I have worked, we also
Mm-hmm.
would then discuss. Okay, now we have to see a lot of this kind of a data. Hence,
Mm-hmm.
where does it make sense for us to park that data? Who will enter that data? Which tool will that data will get entered? Hence, what kind of matrices we want to track, and that led to some decisions in terms of tools. But of course, I mean there are multiple tools like the CS operations tools like SmartKarrot. There are ticketing tools. Right? There are CRMs now. There is a big talk on why CRMs also can be used within CS, or how the CRM access can be extended to the CS teams. So it all depends on where you are at your CS process maturity, and hence what you expect that process to deliver to each of these stakeholders, what matrices you want to track for those matrices, what data needs to be there, and where does that data make sense for you to have the logical house for that data, and that will then determine sort of the course.
Yeah, I think very rightly said, Amol. And now that because you've mentioned tracking the data, making sure that right people enter the data and are responsible for the sanctity of it. And parallelly, also, you just said that what matrices should be tracked to ensure customer health or the degree or the kind of support is being measured. So, if we talk about, let's say, top three or even top five matrices to ensure customer health, what comes to your mind in top five or top three?
Okay. Mm, I think the first metrics that I have typically looked at is number of tickets. So typically we used to do what is the volume of tickets that the customer is raising in a given period of time
Mhm.
versus the particular category average.
Okay.
Right? So if the category average is X and certain customers are above that average, then my natural focus would be somewhere there. So number of tickets, and you can look at number of tickets in different ways, but this is one way that I have looked at in the past. The second one, of course, is trying to find out data around usage and adoption.
Mm.
Right. But again, in my experience, a lot of that is dependent on your product teams and what kind of things that the that on. So that's a very important data that I have seen. Makes a lot of sense for CS
Mhm.
teams to drive what they want to drive. And the third one that I have a strong belief and have worked with is the customer feedback or NPS data. Because
Okay.
depending on the frequency of the NPS data, I've seen that if you really sit with that data and analyze that data well, it will give you specific pointers in terms of what just not just the CS team has to do, but what the CS team has to ask of the other functional areas for them to do, which is rooted in customer feedback. So
Yeah.
these three is what I would what comes to my mind right now. There is a bunch of other matrices I think I had
Yes.
mentioned in my ebook, but I'll not go there. These three
Okay.
top three is what I would irrespective of whatever stage of the customer success, process maturity, organizational maturity. These three I would definitely.
Okay, all right. Uh, Taking cue from these matrices that you've mentioned, Amol, which is usage and adoption, the second being the tickets average and the NPS feedback. Although we are talking about different teams, but you know, whatever data we'll collect out of these three matrices that you've mentioned still resides with the CS team. So, what best practice would you say, or would you advise the CS teams to work on to make sure that these three matrices, which is adoption, making sure that the tickets data is not way too high or is also not so low that the customer is probably not using, and the NPS feedback slowly sees an improvement time after time.
So I think it also depends on how you view your function, right? I mean,
Mhm.
if you draw a very strict line and a wall saying that, hey, you know what, my business happens behind this curtain, behind this wall, behind this line, and you're not allowed to enter. If you're operating your function in that fashion, irrespective of which function you are operating in, it's going to be very, very tough. Right? And again, there's
Mhm.
no right and wrong here. My personal preference is to keep that boundary a little flexible and more open.
Yeah.
So what I mean by that is this is not data belonging to customer success. Number one, it is data that
Mhm.
belongs to the organization. It is your customers'
Yeah.
data. What we are essentially looking at is customer behavior. Right. So
Mhm.
let's talk about, for example, let's talk about the tickets data. Right. Now,
Mhm.
while I'm responsible for responding to those tickets, the reason for which the customer is reaching out to the help desk or the support desk could be various.
Mhm.
Right? And hence, basis that data, if I'm able to distill that data and say that, hey, you know what, people are reaching out in this particular module for this kind of a query more often, and is there a way by which we can fix that? I have seen that product teams are more than willing to sit with you and listen to you. Again, I have experiences on a spectrum, even in those conversations. But that's again, that's the reality from organization to organization that you will discover and you will be. But but at least from my end, we've made that effort to bring that data out and sit with that respective team. Right? Hey, you know
Mhm.
what? Engineering team, this kind of issues have been coming regularly. Right? This bug has been reported multiple times, though it has been closed. It has reoccurred. You know, having your ability, your operational processes in a way to be able to bring that data forth in a non judgmental way, because it's not something that I'm accusing the engineering team of. I'm just stating data. Right? I'm just putting basis what I have received from customers and figuring out a way to solve that in an effective manner. Same way,
Mhm.
if I have a lot of type of queries that are coming, I
Mhm.
think at least in an Indian context, I've seen that product documentation and user guides and keeping them updated with all the releases that happen is a very, very difficult challenge that I have seen in at least in the SaaS environments that I've operated in, either as a customer or even as a service provider when I was at the other side of the table. And hence, if I have to start an effort to build product documentation, which will help my
Mhm.
customers, uh, the
Mhm.
most logical place for me to start is my tickets data, right? And look at what are the top three queries that customers are asking in product A, B, and C, or whatever number of products I have, and say that, okay, fine, these three is what I will start with, and then once I've released those documents, once I've done some activities to popularize that within my customer environment, what will I, how do I see the trend reducing? Having that mindset in that approach itself saves you a lot of effort. Right? So, and then the same logic can then be extended to various other type of data that you have access to. So I think your
Mhm.
ability to ask the right set of questions on the basis of data that you have, or even you may ask the question, you may not have the data, then going out and trying to find that data, or then saying that, hey, you know what, I don't have this data. Now, how do I
Mhm.
ensure that I start capturing this data from the time I woke up and said, oh, I need to have this data. And that's where I always say that you
Very.
start with the process and then figure out which data you want to capture, where will it get captured in the journey, who will be responsible for capturing that data, where will you capture it, which tool hence you will use, whether it is Excel sheet or any other tool, and then the matrices will flow. But a lot of times this will be a cyclical conversation that you will have.
Mhm. This is very insightful, Amol, and I think a lot of the listeners who will be viewing from eternity will strongly agree that to bring out CS matrices on top, you need data from multiple resources. So making sure you filter out the right data set and not everything flows into the kitchen, like you mentioned, so that there's not a hodgepodge of way too much information and very little output of it. In the interest of time, because we've already crossed it, but I still have one last question, which is centered
Sure.
around the ebook that you have written. You have mentioned, you have advocated about a multiverse, which is a culmination of four parts, if I may list them. First is adoption and usage, of course, and the second is the revenue of it. Third is the customer advocacy, and fourth is CS support, which is managing tickets, about which we discussed right now. Uh, Here, I would like to know, in your experience of being in industry for a very large amount of time, what made you think about these four pillars to be, the standing pillars of the CS multiverse, and how did you come to this conclusion?
Yeah, so the CS multiverse is just basically the Marvel fan in me talking about
Yeah.
it. But essentially, what I saw is that I start with the tickets world, right? Because traditionally, at least in my experience, what I've seen is that this is still seen as a support function, right? Customer success is still seen as a support function, and many people who are working on the ground have their backgrounds in customer support, who've been in ticketing agents and calling agents or whatever. From there, now their designations have been changed to CSMs. Very few of these guys have even been formally trained on what does CS mean, and hence what are you supposed to do. So starting with the tickets data makes a lot of sense because that's the world that they're most familiar with. Then from there, you sort of graduate them into the world of usage and adoption, because the usage and adoption world, like I said, you can't do that transition just by yourself. Because if I want to track usage and adoption, but if my product is not built in that way where I will be able to track usage and adoption at different points in time, and if let's say if I have multiple products, within each product there are multiple critical actions that the users have to take. There are multiple users of my application, right? And how do I look at all of that? I can't do that on my own as CS. I need my engineering and my product teams buy-in and support for me to drive that. So that's a huge shift from moving from that world to this world. And that's why if you are aware that, okay, I need that kind of a support, then you'll be able to represent that internally. And unless you have the handle on your usage and adoption, you would not be able to drive the financial metrics, because the financial metrics are an outcome of how successful the customer is using that product. And it will always be, you will always be playing a catch-up game if you don't have enough data and handle on your usage and adoption data of your customers. Because otherwise, I'm talking to you and I'm asking Shivani, okay, what problems are you facing? Right? How are you using product X for problems Y? And then I'm listening to you, and then I'm trying to figure out something around that. Now, for me to do this at scale, it's going to be very, very tough, right? And hence the financial matrices come next. And unless I have perfected that part, I can't really go into the customer advocacy piece. Now, that's the sort of a natural progression that I believe needs to happen, and that's where then it also becomes multi-dimensional, multi-functional. Because when I start talking about financial
Yeah.
data, then my finance and accounts team will also come into picture. How am I billing my customers? How frequently do I bill them? Which customers are paying me on time? Which customers are habitual late payers? How easy is the process of payment and collection from the customer point of view? What challenges do they have in the payment and collection process?
Mm.
Right. So all of those conversations will start to happen when you start thinking about it. But you can't sort of jump from one to the other. It's, in my opinion, it's a natural transition, and that's how we look at it.
Yeah, I think this also serves a great advice to us who are working in this circle about how to go about making sure that there's a balance of everything and not too little or too much of one thing. So it's
Yeah.
a great discussion, Amol. I have
Same here.
taken a little bit extra of your time, but thank you for your patience. Thanks a lot. Look forward to more rounds of discussion with you. Thank you for today.
Sure, sure. Thank you, Shivani. I hope this is of value to your listeners, and it was great to talk to you. And thank you for having me once again.
Yeah, thanks a lot.
Thank
Take
you.
care.
Bye bye.